Okay, welcome back. Welcome to part two of the Art and Power lecture, the political impulse or the authority impulse. Um, and when we were last talking, we were just talking about how just simply the act of artists putting regular everyday people, especially lower class or poorer people, how much of a how much of a radical statement that can be and has been interpreted. And so that leads to an interesting kind of case study, which is that sometimes artists will make artwork with no intent whatsoever of being political or creating any kind of political controversy, but it can lead to politics. So a good example is this painting here. This painting right now is was titled by Paulo Veronese as The Feast in the House of Levi, but it was originally titled The Last Supper, right? It is a Last Supper painting. And um, like Leonardo da Vinci, right? Veronese was hired by a group of monks who were living in a monastery. They wanted for their um, eating hall, right? They wanted a painting of the Last Supper. But unlike the monks who hired Leonardo da Vinci, who basically they just wanted something that represented their piety, these monks who hired Veronese, they were not particularly pious. These were wealthy men, people who had used their positions in the church to become powerful and rich. And there's people who enjoyed life, and they wanted a painting that would be full of life and full of things to look at, just fun things. They wanted it to be an enjoyable, lively sort of painting. And so there are dogs, there are German soldiers, someplace, I can't quite remember where they are. There's um, kind of circus entertainers, small children, of people of various nationalities and various occupations. All through the whole painting, there's this huge crowd, just all these people, as well as Jesus and the disciples in the center. And so Veronese made this painting for his patrons, pretty much as they wanted it, right? What they asked for. But then later on, he got into trouble with the church and with uh, the Inquisition because people found out about it and it was interpreted as an impious or as almost a heretical act to have painted the Last Supper this way with all of this kind of craziness going on. And so he was brought before a trial. He was held in prison and then brought to a trial, and they interrogated him, asking him about the painting. And in fact, we even have through maybe through Vasari, I can't quite remember who, but we have kind of like sort of a somewhat of a transcript of what was said at the at this trial. And in the end, Veronese proposed that why doesn't he just not change the name of the painting to Feast in the House of Levi, a different biblical scene, still with Jesus in the center. And for whatever reason, this satisfied the Inquisition and it was let go. But what's interesting to me is how politics is not always, like we tend to think of a lot of art as being apolitical, but it's not always easy to avoid politics. Another point I want to make about politics is that there are different ways for artists to address politics. One way would be um, directly, but oftentimes artists address politics more allegorically. So here we have a kind of a good example of that, where we have two paintings by David from two different periods in David's life, one from the beginning period of his career and one from the end. And in the beginning one, he's using allegory. He's talking about an event from Roman history to then discuss what he sees as the lack of good moral character in his own society of France, right? He's basically using this painting where these sons who are pledging an oath to their father um, are a good representation of what a true citizen who's willing to stand up to their government is about, right? And so he's making a statement about what he thinks that the French, no, nobility and what the French middle class should do, right? But um, using the allegory of ancient history to tell that story. Whereas just about 9 years later, David is making a political painting that is really straightforward or direct, right? Here, a leader of the French Revolution was assassinated, and David makes a painting of that, right, of that moment. And there's Marat stabbed in the chest, dead in a bathtub, at his writing desk, and it's a beautiful painting. It's a fascinating painting. You can look at it endlessly, and but what's to me interesting in this is just the very different approach to making a political statement, one direct and one more allegorical. And so we have seen other examples along the way of artists making art about protest or art that is protesting something, right? The Wrath of Medusa, we've talked about the Wrath of Medusa multiple times in terms of its composition, in terms of its use of value, but what we haven't actually really talked about what it's about, right? This is a painting about a shipwreck, but it's not just any shipwreck. It's a shipwreck, a ship that was heading to Africa, and was part of a French effort to colonize certain parts of Africa, and it's about and the tragedy of this, right? That the thing that got the French society all upset was that with this event, it both showed that the French companies that were trying to bring colonizers to France were basically doing it on the cheap and risking everyone's lives, but also that with this effort, the French were becoming implicated in the slave trade, even though slavery was already illegal in France. Um, and so here we have a different painting, Liberty Leading the People, which is also kind of a political, but it's a much more straightforward political painting. It is a painting about street protests in support of protests, right? In 1830, there were revolutions going on all over Europe, including in Paris. And um, and sorry about that confusion. And they were, um, and so he was making a painting. He was there right at that moment. He was making a painting about that and in support of that. So, how much more time do I have? I have about a minute. So we're going to rush through a little bit some of the modern, right? But I wanted to just point out some other examples of artists making artwork that's either in opposition to war and to atrocities, such as Goya's prints about the atrocities of war, and then the Jake and Dinos Chapman piece that was based off of that, and about some more 20th century examples, right? We have seen the elegy to Spanish Republic already, and Guernica. I'm not sure if I've actually told you the story of Guernica, but that'll have to wait for another time. Once again, sorry about that, but we're almost wrapping up. So I'm going to just very quickly talk about some contemporary art, right? That specifically, I'm going to talk about this piece, Sunflower Seeds, and then I'm going to talk about these two artists. So Sunflower Seeds is, hold on a second. Sunflower Seeds is a piece by Ai Weiwei, and it's a statement about, kind of an ironic statement about the Chinese government. But I think I'm going to have to end there. Unfortunately, I have to do a third part in which I'll just wrap it up. Okay, thank you.